Welcome back to the Simpleton Podcast, the most popular podcast in eternity. Welcome, new listener, Pope Leo XIV. Welcome back, Laura. I had a real listener yesterday, reach out about your welfare. I think everyone's dying to know, in this gap, were you institutionalized for any reason, like criminal health, mental health, or in-laws?
I don't like those private questions.
Okay, well, it would help us all pray for you more that you're doing well in life. All right. We have two interesting topics today. The gluttony of delicacy, or effeminacy versus femininity. And we're going to talk about the new Pope and his relationship to social doctrine and what we might hope for with regards to that. So I'll start out with how this came on my radar. Well, first it came on my radar because I have a lot of friends who are super smart, super educated, kind of intellectually alive Catholics. And sometimes you hang out and it's like bourbon is the hobby of the moment, or whiskey, or fine watches, or whatever. And you're like, this is starting to look a little bit like elitism, fellas. What's going on here? Right? And is this even good? Should we even be embracing this at all? Or limitedly embracing it? And I kept thinking about how saints I know I've read, but I couldn't quite find the term, talk about you don't want to have these refined tastes, Yeah.
And I think it's a thing, we focus in our ministry of, being able to, for a ministry event, cook a hearty, home-cooked, delicious meal that is not too frilly, that everyone wants and enjoys, and being able to accept, the food that we are offered to by ministry people, and being able to pick something at the McDonald's menu when that's the ministry thing that makes sense. So that I think that's been sort of a little bit in the air. And then I also think a lot of us maybe know the screw tape letter example, of course, being, a little bit particular about lightly toasted. Or
one time during ministry, we were with a Sudanese family that had all converted into Catholicism. And we visit and they're cooking this delicious lunch. And the lunch is beef lung in peanut butter sauce. Right. And it's offered to us.
Not heart.
It was lung. And it's offered to us, and I eat it. And the other missionary next to me looks at me with, do I have to eat this? And I'm like, I think you know the answer to that. So, it was quite the delicacy. We were gluttons for the delicacy. All right. So, let me go what really kind of brought this into focus. So there was a horrible piece, wonderful. It was the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. It was grotesque art. Right? When someone makes something really, really ugly that you're like, that is genius. That's what this was. And it was made by Andrew Tate of the, what do you call that thing? The brosphere or the manosphere. All right. So this guy is a disreputable character.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. But what he shows is he's in this very modern house, glass walls, blah, 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 on a white leather couch. Love the white leather couches, wearing something that looks kind of like underwear, but kind of not like underwear. Something of age. That's all he's wearing. It's this underwear thing. Can't quite tell what it is, right? Sitting on the white leather couch with dumbbells. His bald self, his hairless body, bald self, right? And then he has this garden hose running across the ground. It just is getting better, right? And he takes this garden hose and sucks it. And it's like an enormous hookah hose, right? And he has his laptop up and a stack of expensive watches and a stack of cash on the table. And this is masculinity.
According to...
That's what he sells, right? He sells the manosphere masculinity, right?
Yeah.
And someone commented that this, in fact, is effeminacy.
Yeah.
And it was like, you nailed it. That is what it is, right?
Yeah.
But the way it came to my attention was a different conservative commentator had taken this and said, you guys are all wrong. Andrew Tate has bad taste. White leather is not the way to go here. flaunting your wealth's not the way to go here. This is just, bad
It's
taste,
just a matter
right?
of bad taste.
But
yeah.
like real men, like you have to know real men, according to this guy, are like 007, and Ian Fleming, the creator of 007, especially in the books, he says, develops him as nearly having OCD about everything. The whole reason why 007 has the famous line of shaken, not stirred, is because he's that darn delicate and particular. And that he wouldn't have said delicate. He would say that particular about the fine things in life. And when I read this guy's defense of this, like, I thought, you just convinced me that 007's effeminate too.
Yeah.
You know? And this is interesting to me because it's like, I would, like, 007 exists like in a very rarefied space. So does Andrew Tate, And our bishop here will eat whatever you put in front of him and not complain. And I could see doing almost anything with him. I could see hiking. I could see starting a business with him. I think he's a quality person with depth that has strength, and he doesn't require, fine whiskeys. What I'm seeing is that I actually have no problem if there's something in your life that you've gotten like real particular about, like a car guy with cars. I've been members of very weird, it's like when it's a fetish, right?
Yeah.
2 very weird things I got into were vintage garden tractors and vintage paintball guns. Uh-huh. By vintage in the paintball world, we're talking about like 1985 and 1990, And I've joined online communities for these things. And it's actually been kind of beneficial to me because I learned about machining. I learned about how to fix engines. I learned about all these things. And I became much more capable through meeting these guys who have an unreasonable love for old paintball guns and old garden tractors, right? But when that is spread to everything, where it's like, I desire the watch, I desire the fine food, I desire the soap or the clothing or the whatever, I actually think this is like a very negative moral situation that is, in fact, effeminate, not feminine, but fakely feminine in some way. And we should talk about that distinction. And it makes the person weak. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about that. The picture of Andrew Tate is like, well, there's like a useless person sitting on a couch. You describe that, right? And this commentator, whatever, is saying, no, he should hide his uselessness a little bit better, with good taste, right? And it's like the same thing. But I just think that there's like a lot, like, it's like you really like beer. You learn about like different types of beer and whatever, like, great, fine. If you don't appreciate a cold Bud Light after a day of being out in the sun, like, I'm like, you don't like beer, actually. If it's like the special super hoppy IPA, whatever is the only thing that will do, then I'm like, you like status, not beer. I think there's like a funny thing like that. And sometimes when you meet someone that has like a hobby or an interest that they've really developed, and they can sort of let you into that world for a brief period of time and get excited and show you like, look, this is this really interesting mechanism on this paintball gun, and it's unusual because of this. Like, I can get into that, for a little while and listen to that and be interested. Yeah. No, I'm not. That's like not my hobby, right? But I like meeting people that have really developed an interest and gone deep on something and hearing about that and getting their expertise and asking the questions I don't have anybody else to ask about whatever is but. Yeah, but I think the other sort of character, and it's like, the gym person that is like so in shape that they have such a like specialized diet, and they can't, their diet or their training schedule or this or that. And it's like they're kind of have made themselves a weaker, less resilient person, by being so particular.
Like, I think what we're saying is kind of obvious. Let's get into real femininity versus effeminacy. not many of my friends could responsibly wear a $10,000 watch.
Oh my gosh.
But I have many friends who probably would want to.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's because the watch works better.
Yeah.
You know, and there is a point where it is kind of cool to see better and better craftsmanship. And then there's a point where you've maxed that and you're now in the completely diminishing returns field of just like crazy status. And like you are actually getting worked by the marketing, you know? But having said all this, it's effeminate to be like that, to somehow lose the practicality, you know? So I'm defining effeminacy as like a fake, like a delicacy and a fake femininity. And it's funny with the Andrew Tate thing because he doesn't want to be seen as feminine, yet he's projecting it. Do
you think delicacy is feminine or effeminate?
I think men need to be able to carry burdens, do work, and they need to be developing that in themselves, right? So if they're developing themselves to be touchy, to be delicate, I mean, people are going to get sick. People are going to have weaknesses. That's all fine, right?
Yeah.
But you're supposed to be like, the goal is not to be sick. The goal is not to be touchy. The goal is to be robust, be capable, you know, provide for your family and for the poor. You know, that's got to be the goal. I think a man's goal particularly should be to give more than he receives.
My favorite big wave surfer. I heard him say something like, oh, you know, it's like anytime I get an injury, people are like, oh my gosh, like, what are you going to do? How are you going to go on? You know, like, is everything okay? And his response is like, of course I have an injury. I'm using my body. Like, it's just like, I'm using my body. I'm wearing it out. It's okay. I'm not like in the business of preserving this like physique or this. Everything he does isn't to maintain this thing. It's like he's using it.
So like the example of like 007, he can beat people up. He's very fit. So is Andrew Tate, you know, and but like if we needed to work at McDonald's to provide for our families, I wouldn't want 007 beside me. I think he'd break down at the fryer. And I think that there's a dignity in that men have to embrace, that we do what's necessary to carry on, you know.
I think 007 is an outlier because I see a lot of gym bros that I think are kind of useless physically.
This is true.
And the kind of hardworking dad might be, you know.
All right. So having said that, if you see like a very masculine man who has that kind of solidness and that internal strength and things, might be big, might be small, might be whatever, and he holds a little baby and cradles it like a mother would, it can be very beautiful, right? And in fact, men always have feminine traits, you know? And I think the great tragedy of this whole sexual, political, trans thing that came about over the last so many years was that men with more feminine traits were victims and women with more masculine traits were victims because they were told it like wasn't okay to be a tomboy. You are in fact a boy, which, I mean, historically, women with masculine traits had great marriages, raised great families, did all these things very successfully. And so did petite women, you know, who were very feminine, you know, and men likewise, right? And there's also different, you know, ways that men become useful in society. The same guy who can, like Teddy Roosevelt's kind of a funny guy because he's like kind of a warrior, kind of a failed cowboy, but tried to be a cowboy at least, you know, also from Silver Spoon, New York, you know, but he's like all things, like a politician who stood up against the system and all these other things. But a lot of guys are one of those things. You know, they'll never be a cowboy, but you know what? They can stand up at city council or they can hold the line when it needs held, right? And that's very masculine in my mind, even if they're not masculine in every possible dimension, right? And I think in the same way that men can have this fake femininity that in fact is just completely negative, I think women can too. And an example that happened to me many, many, many moons ago, it was in actually Northern Virginia. We were helping someone move. So all the friends had shown up with vehicles and to help carry boxes, right? And there were probably like 3-4 guys there and probably 5-6 women there, all unmarried, where it's all like whatever, right? And after a while, once the guys were there, all the women quit carrying boxes down the stairs. So 3 out of the 8 people were moving everything because a woman shouldn't have to carry a box down the stairs. Right. And then I noticed that one of them, who was kind of a friend of mine, I didn't know that well, when no one was looking, like when all the other girls were out of the house, she would carry it down if she wasn't seen. Right. And she knew that there was like this like fake delicacy happening and that, yeah, she's capable of carrying a box down the stairs. Yeah. Right. And I found out later, I found out later her friends nicknamed her Pioneer Woman. But anyway.
Well, like the Proverbs 31 woman was doing some hard work, you know.
Right. And there's also like coquetry.
Light needlework.
There's also this like this word that coquettish, coquetry, coquette, which is kind of like this idea of like a woman who's signaling to all the men that she's just so fragile and she's just so delicate and she's just so in need of a man to help her. You know, this is also fake femininity. And it's pretty negative, you know?
Yeah.
So, okay. So if you try to be too macho, you actually close the loop and become effeminate. That's the lesson here. All right. Bum, bum, bum. We have a new pope. All right. I gotta say, I was surprised he was American. One of the reasons I wasn't totally surprised is back when Benedict was elected, I went through the College of Voting Cardinals and tried to calculate how many of them were American. And it was over 10%. It was like right above 10%. And I thought, well, that's a big constituency, you know? So I thought it's not impossible, you know? And then this guy spends a lot of time in Italy and also a couple decades in South America. So he kind of has the South American, all that. Anyway, the Holy Spirit chose him. Forget my political analysis of his election. But well, I think everyone's pretty high on him right now. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I am also, I'm like very happy about him. And I was actually gonna probably be happy just by choice about whoever it was. But there seems to be something charming that is delighting people. And I think that's nice.
Right. I do think we'll talk here in a minute about maybe you don't want to be too happy because you set yourself up for being disappointed.
I do think there is like a funny little research project going on where it's like everyone is trying to find proof that he's going to be like a pope on their side. And that's a bad project, you know. And it turns out he's maybe like a nuanced person that can't be put in the box people want to put him in. So hallelujah, that's also good. But
my question to you is, who do you believe? Give me at least 3 names of who you believe are the most influential Catholics internationally alive right now.
The Pope is the obvious person. I think. Clark, who do you think?
You know, Laura's going way out of her way not to agree with me here, so she doesn't want to say my picks.
Well, they're your picks. I was kind of at a loss.
If you agree with them, say them. All right. I believe the most influential Catholics in the world. By the way, when I ask everybody this, they're all saying Mike Schmidt, Father Mike Schmidt. And I'm like, I think that's a certain generation of Americans.
Yeah.
You know, I think Bishop Barron's on there internationally, not just in the U.S., as much as anyone's international in Catholicism. I think that J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
And I think if you wanted to replace J.D. Vance with either Curtis Martin, who is not so much his speaking that's been influential, but the model of ministry he's built with focus that is built not only as focus, just like gotten enormous, but like all these other ministries using his model that he pioneered are everywhere now. Like there's at least a half dozen more things using his model. And which I don't know that he invented. He kind of took it from Protestantism, but very influential in the church. I don't think those places would be here now if it weren't for Curtis Martin.
I think that's a good. I mean, some people might say James Martin.
I think he's less influential than he's ever been. I think 10 years ago or 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, he was more influential. So I kind of think he dropped off. I'm also not sure how much beyond our borders he goes. You know, but also when you just look up like go look up we're going to do this right now. Kelly, you can speed this up if you want. I'm going to go to YouTube. And I'm going to do Father James Martin SJ, right? So the highest view count video of Father James Martin has Stephen Colbert on it and has 450K views. And Mike Schmidt's responding to Father James Martin has 400K views. All right. But now let's do Bishop Barron real quick.
Well, also Bishop Barron has like multiple channels here. All right.
And he's founding a religious order and all these things. All right. So Bishop Barron has 4.5 million views on his biggest video. So that's like 9x what, Father James Martin's best video is. And Father James Martin had Colbert on it too, so that's a different category. So I don't know. I mean, like, this is all a matter of opinion. These guys are from Ohio and Illinois. Martin, I think, is from Louisiana. These are not from New York City, LA, DC, Boston. They're not from Europe. These are like weirdly Midwest Catholicism and Southern Catholicism is having a moment. Isn't that interesting? I just think that that's kind of a interesting tone shift. Now that we've belabored that point, why do you think he chose the name Leo XIV?
So he said that Leo XIII, his papacy and Rerum Novarum and just his writings were responding to kind of a major shift in the world that needed the church to respond to it. And we've kind of, we are now, in the midst or at the precipice of another sort of major shift that needs a response from the church.
One of the things that's different, though, is so the Industrial Revolution is a watershed mark in history. We've talked about this on the podcast before. 1 billion people before for a long time to 8 billion people today. It was a earth-defining change, was the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, and I heard a thing that I think put it in a different sort of way of thinking about it for me. Like C.S. Lewis thought, the man of antiquity, ancient Rome, and the man just before the Industrial Revolution, there was a great continuity, sort of context for existence and being and cosmology and rhythm that, the man from antiquity and the man just before the Industrial Revolution, they would sort of recognize themselves in that person and in society, and then the Industrial Revolution disrupted that, in an enormous way, so much so that the man just before the Industrial Revolution wouldn't maybe really recognize society, a few decades after, and so are we at a moment like that again? Yes. The man in the early days after the Industrial Revolution, would he recognize himself in the world of the internet and AI and phones in our hands all the time and the abundance and choice that we have today? And no, I think is the answer to that.
So in particular, the Pope's pointing out AI, and so did that last letter from the Vatican, that AI is an epoch-changing moment. So it's a watershed moment. An interesting difference, though, is that Leo XIII actually starts dealing with the Industrial Revolution 90 years after it began. And the popes with AI, the epoch change has not yet fully happened, or not even fully happened. I don't think it's happened yet, It could be coming next year, next 10 years, we don't know. But the popes are trying to get on this not 90 years after it happens.
Yeah, it's like we're still in the midst of it. We don't know what AI, where it's going, how it's going to change. I mean, maybe you could argue that 90 years after you were still in the midst of everything changing, but it was beyond, it was on the other side of the saddle there, for sure. Yeah.
It wasn't like people in the year, it wasn't like the Pope in the year 1800 saw people leaving the land of factories and said, hey, I need to say something now. It was like long after that had happened, he got on it. So by choosing this name, the Pope is kind of like, I don't know if you'd say throw down the gauntlet, or claimed that he is going to help or reiterate the social doctrine in this epochal moment to get ready for the future. Right. That is an enormous signal he's sending. You say that's true?
Yes.
Okay. And I think, now here's my controversial take. I think the social doctrine, you've already heard on this podcast multiple critiques I've had of the social doctrine that I don't think it's dealing with some basic questions. But I think it's been far oversold. And I think it's much more a Catholic pastoral thing than actually a politically influential, important doctrine. And this I think is important to realize, because I don't think we've realized it. So that's where I'm going to try to make a case for this. Okay. I know that the social doctrine has affected many other Catholics, and changed things in the church. For example, Pope in Rerum Novarum, he's very clear that a complete laissez-faire capitalism and a communism are both wrong. Right? I think I'm more tempted to the laissez-faire capitalism. It kept me from going there. I know there's other people tempted to communism. It probably kept them from going there. That's a good piece of document.
Yeah.
Right. And I also know that it started getting interpreted in the middle of the 20th century as just like pro-social welfare, kind of like pro-immigration, pro-social welfare. And it kind of got lazily interpreted that, and it influenced the way Catholics related to politics as a group in America, at least. And it also very much changed the way Catholic charities are run in America, I think, in not a positive way. Okay. And having said all this, I think that what we're sold is that, I've been told so many times I can't even handle it, that it's the secret of the church, it's the great secret evangelical teaching of the church. There's whole universities that the way they were educating people for decades, I think it's starting to die out, but you can still find universities like this, that the social doctrine is kind of like, almost like the main part of the church. In a sense, like, it's not about orthodoxy and all these other ways. It's about this like practical, way we want to run the world type thing. And so many young people have taken it on faith that they are going to change the world through this social doctrine. And I think if you look back, ever since 1890, I can't point to a single legislation that I know wouldn't have passed without the social doctrine. I can't point to any major thing that I know wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the social doctrine. In fact, the only thing I can kind of think I could prove is that he gave Catholics more permission to get involved in these movements and got out of their way, kind of broke this like the church. The two things about the social doctrine we need to keep in mind is the church has been political since at least Constantine. All right. So the church being political is not the social doctrine. Okay. The other thing is the church has been charitable since Jesus. The church being charitable is not the social doctrine. The social doctrine is an attempt at a social justice, like a systemic reform of things. And the way we talk about it is as if we're going to figure out the socially just way to run things. And then not only us Catholics, but other people are going to be influenced by it, and that all these governments are going to somehow be more just as a result. So like an example of this might be the 8-hour workday.
I think when I read the compendium of Catholic social teaching, I was like, now I will learn the way to live my life, and that we should have, what our government should look like, how, I thought I was going to get the rules and all the,
Finally, it's a practical Catholic teaching, not just like
and how to
Trinitarian theology.
Yeah. Yes. And it's just not that. You can't get that out of there. So I think when you say there's maybe like a lazy interpretation, it's like anybody presenting it that way, I don't know. It's not, it's just like not it's not the system. It's not putting forth a system that now you can like apply. I
think that's logically true, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do think it's like what you're saying is right. It also influenced many. It's hard to imagine the Catholic worker movement without the social doctrine. It's hard to imagine. But the other thing is, though, it became kind of abused in a way, right? Like, here's an example of social doctrine that no one takes seriously. Pope Benedict wrote 2 encyclicals on social doctrine, right? One was God is love, one is love and truth, right? And he asks you in love and truth to essentially be prudent and not naive, right? That your love needs to be consistent with the truth, not just wishful thinking that we're helping the homeless, even though we don't see any of them actually get off the street, right? But then God is love. He says things like, we should not be doing works that secular philanthropists could do, right? Catholic Charities across America has never come to terms with that statement, and that would be a revolutionary statement if taken seriously, right? So what we have done, though, is we've conflated it to mean more Medicare, more better, more immigration, more better, more, and that's like not completely an abuse of the interpretation of the social doctrine, but it's also clear that it's not. Obviously, you can disagree with that and still be consistent with the social doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, at some level, more and more welfare does violate the principles of solidarity and human flourishing. So yeah, and that those are really important ideas in there.
And we also know that the social doctrine did not prevent 40 years later the spread of communism over half of Europe. Even in Catholic majority countries, it didn't prevent it, right? We also know that Catholic countries where Catholics are the majority in Latin America and South America haven't become some social justice paradise, even though they're majority Catholic and we have the social doctrine, right? And it appears to me that the hope that that's what the purpose of this doctrine is a misfounded hope. That it's got a different purpose than that, but it's constantly oversold. And with this AI idea that this Pope, I think, has basically said, we need fresh social doctrine for the AI moment. It's just weird because it's like the people who control AI are some business tycoons, maybe the Trump administration and maybe Xi Jinping. That's about the complete people who could do a lot of work on AI, or seriously influence the future, right? Mm-hmm. The Pope's not one of those people, right? It's not like the Vatican's the one developing these, AI bots, right? And and most of those people wouldn't even listen to the Pope.
Yeah.
I think J.D. Vance is probably the one who might most listen to the Pope. And he also is uniquely talented in the way that he was in Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist, funding and talking about these ideas. And he's a political leader. So he both knows AI, knows the culture of the Silicon Valley people who are the ones furthering it, and he has the power to actually do something. I think we also know that it wasn't like Leo stood up and put the Industrial Revolution back in the bag. Pandora's box was open, right? And I think we're getting there with AI too, that the Pope has no chance of rescinding AI.
I talked to Seth Smith, who is a historian and professor at CUA and Clark's cousin.
And CUA was founded by
Pope Leo XIII.
Right on, man. Let's go CUA, Cardinals.
Woo. The Industrial Revolution came, working conditions changed drastically, and it was like you could be kind of Catholic and on the side of the church, and the church had been more or less aligned with capital, or you could join kind of these labor groups that seem to have a more, communist, Marxist. Seth said that Pope Leo thought that we had lost a generation of Catholics by the church not being in tune or responding to the plight of the worker. And that you kind of left people between having to choose, their faith or the thriving of their family, their work, situation. And that this we lost a lot of Catholics in that. So I think this was like a significant, I understood that this was a significant thing about Rerum Novarum. So it wasn't like necessarily putting forth a systemic change. It was like allowing Catholics to respond to the new, be in the new way of existence in the new world in a way that promoted their flourishing and thriving. And then the other thing I got from Seth is just like none of the encyclicals really like are like boom change. It's more forming the conscience, forming the intellectual lives of Catholics that read it. And so then that's the question: is this more a systematic sort of political change, or is this more a pastoral?
Out of the way.
Getting out of the way, but then and then a pastoral.
I think that part of the reason why it was significant, and this is not coming from Professor Seth, but who's my second cousin, by the way. But no, I think part of the reason why is Europe was at the cusp of losing the nobility, right? So for like 1,000 years, what it had meant to be French or Spanish or whatever was you are allegiant to the king. You weren't communist, you weren't libertarian, you were allegiant to the king, right? And the Pope, when he was political, dealt with kings. Right. This is kind of coming to the end at World War I.
Yeah. And
the communist revolutions and things. Right. Because the proletariat and the issues in Rerum Novarum are becoming so big. And by the end of war, I think Downton Abbey is actually a show about the end of nobility, and it's just an interesting moment in history. Right. So I think the church had been overly identified with nobility because it looked like a monarchy itself, and it had dealt with the monarchs, and it was kind of starting to talk to the people and not the monarchs with the Rerum Novarum.
Yeah. And I think they're also...
And giving the people permission to not just say, this king is... I actually have to choose between laissez-faire capitalism and whatever, workers' rights and all that.
It was the whole sort of way that Europe had existed was changing, and that it was also meaning, the church influence was changing drastically as France was becoming more secular. The Italian unification was happening, and which sort of made the importance of Rome like a whole different thing. So that there was just this big political sort of change in the church becoming less. Having less sort of political power, but yes, it had been political, and now it finds itself in this new position.
Well, my sense is it was over-identified with monarchy. And now it's like saying, no, we're going to talk about politics in general, not like who the rightful king of Spain is. But I think something you mentioned earlier was he's the first pope that didn't have the papal states. So he's the first pope that actually wasn't also a monarch. At least the first pope in a long time. There were popes that weren't monarchs before him. But so in a way, that's kind of just like giving Catholics permission to engage politics in a new way. The church is disassociating itself with the past of the pre-industrial revolution politics. But is it actually transforming the world? And we just don't have great evidence that the social doctrine transformed the world. You can show me great guys, but are they if you think of political thinkers who transformed the world, we could list Marx, Lenin, Mao, even Henry Kissinger. These guys had massive influence on the way people think about politics and the right way to organize things and do things, right? The social doctrine is not in that list. And that's a weird thing for Catholics to accept because I think it's been oversold for a long time, right? So then what, if that's all true, what are we hoping for from a pope who wants to help with the AI epoch shift, but he has no control over these tycoons, so he can't put the cat back in the bag or anything like that, right? I think what would be interesting is if he is going to show us our proper relationship to these devices, both things like your cell phone and AI, and maybe even robots, right? And that will be pastoral work, primarily for Catholics. I remember there was this moment where I just read this, and I assumed people were very impressed by this, but like Obama had visited Pope Benedict, and Pope Benedict had met with him and given him the Vatican's document on bioethics, because stem cells, I think, were the raging issue of the moment, right? And it was like,
did Obama read it?
Did Obama care? Right.
No, right.
Obama cares about diplomacy with the Vatican. Does he care about what Catholics think about it?
Yeah, no, like, you know, I'm assuming he didn't read it.
Right. It's kind of like
a joke, but yeah.
It's like an esoteric bioethics writing, right? And I think that if we publish something in AI, it's going to be key for us Catholics to enact. It won't be like a Silicon Valley tycoon who's like, did you just see this great, you know, AI thing by the Vatican? And what I'm wondering is, I'm ready to go to a new crazy spot. Are you ready to go? I
think that we like to think that we have the opportunity to really like convince people on these sort of long arguments. And it's like, maybe there is like a moment where Mother Teresa at like the National Prayer Breakfast said abortion was evil. It was like one sentence, you know, and that I just feel like it's like that's maybe the bandwidth of what, you know, and that didn't change anything.
Right. I mean, I think that Catholics have had an enormous effect on politics. Like, I think the concept of human rights and even the Enlightenment are hard to imagine without a Catholic background, but that's not social doctrine. Where I was going to go was in the compendium, it talks about how the church grew up in an agrarian society, the pre-industrial society, right? And not only that, it grew up in a Mediterranean European pre-industrial society, right? And so a lot of what we think of as normal in the church, like Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, matches, you know, the agrarian society pretty well. You know, like historically, agrarian societies have feasts at harvest, and
things were kind of leaner at the end of winter.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of work, a lot of sowing, but not a lot of harvesting in spring, you know? So in a way, it's kind of funny when you see the rhythm of the Catholic life that grew up there now being applied to an office worker who's eating Chipotle every lunch, and also an African farmer whose harvest time is our Lent, like his harvest season is Lent.
Right. Yeah, anyone south of the equator.
Right. And Christmas is probably 100 degrees outside for him, poor guy. And it obviously, I don't know that, I mean, I'm not necessarily for changing it. It's interesting to me that, like, I've had a lot of friends who are Seventh-day Adventists. It's like, when we just decided to celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday and not Saturday, people like lost it. And there's a whole religion devoted to celebrating on Saturday, not Sunday. Yeah. But like, I think like there's an argument to be made. We should rethink our asceticisms and our practices based on these watershed moments.
I actually like think it's like really good for man to be in touch with nature and the physical world. And I think getting in touch with the seasons, you know, if you are living in such a way where you're not, like, I think it could do a person some good. And I think, you know, fruit that is harvested in its appropriate season tends to be healthier is what people say. But right now it's like we live in a time that it's like, unless you like work outdoors, or maybe you're in another part of the world, but in the US and a lot of Europe is just in a time where it's just like abundance year round, you know, and you have to sort of be intentional. And if you live in a world of abundance, it's like, what do fasting, like almsgiving, penance mean? Which are like kind of constitutional parts of being Catholic.
I think you're right that fasting, almsgiving, and penance mean something different in this. Like, a lot of people hate to say this, but like, we're almost already at a post-scarcity society, right? Compared to 100 years ago and compared to 200 years ago, right? But I think what's interesting now is seems as important that we might fast from technology to get in tune with our own thoughts as fast from food.
Yeah. And
right?
I think like I'm not a super high-tech person, and I'm like not eat whatever, like take all the apps off my phone is like pretty stressful. Like I'm like, ooh, it's not on there. No,
So I think that like if the Pope decided to move Advent or move Lent or create a whole new Lent in a different time of year, which has been promulgated by some saints before, I don't know that would be the way he goes, but like it would be interesting to me if part of the like Good Friday fast was you never log on to a computer or your phone.
Or like the fast before Mass, you're not supposed to eat,
an hour of not interacting.
And maybe you're not watching TV or on social media.
And I think that he could do that like pretty easily. Like if he just said on Good Friday, you will not, you'll do all the fast of Good Friday, and you won't get on the internet, and you won't do this, you won't do this. I think liberal, Catholics, conservatives, Orthodox, unorthodox will all be like, makes sense, right? I think we probably need more than that. And we're going to need more direction on like how we integrate AI. Like are we going to say these are the ground principles of a AI a Catholic can use? If it's not built with these ground principles of like truth, of being consistent with these pro-human health type things.
It's kind of like a bioethics, right? But like a tech ethics now. Like it's like there are things that Catholics know are not,
I would hope, and ethics would be, I think they would feel very comfortable issuing an ethics, and I'm for it. Go for it. I would almost feel like it should be more than an ethics. It should be like at least a suggested discipline.
Oh, yeah.
That's where I'm going with this. So I think that would be an interesting way to think about this. Like instead of him like writing a new social doctrine that matters a little bit to us, but matters almost not at all to people outside of us, if he started like giving Catholics much more pastoral direction directly on interacting with tech, wow, that'd be interesting. Like I think in the maximalist way, it would be every Sabbath, lay it down, 1 day a week. Now the church never does maximalist stuff. They're always like minimal fasting. Minimal standards. Yeah.
I think the new Pope has mentioned multiple times being inspired by the Eastern churches, though. And I think the Roman Catholic Church tends to be more minimalist.
Well, I don't think the Eastern churches you can even group because they don't have the same authority. You know what I mean? Like they don't even have a catechism.
Okay. I think they tend to do fasting more rigorously, maybe.
I think they might have a better culture of fasting.
Yeah. Like man has the same questions as man has always had for all of time. And like the church still has the same elements as always, but it's like we're at a new moment and we need to interpret what does fasting mean? What does penance mean?
I don't even know if you have to put it under those things. It could be a whole new category. What does interaction with technology mean? Because that's like what is changing us, Like
it needs a very like foundational, elemental response of how to interact because it is so part of life, like it's not the same as like, what movies can Catholics watch? Here's a list of movies we're going to put out, like it's more foundational than do this, not that. I just like, I think it's like changing man's position in the world, how man interacts, understands, knows God and himself and the neighbor and reality and the physical world, and prayer and silence. And I don't know.
Something I always worry about is Brave New World is a book as old as the social doctrine. And the way it paints it is that there were people who chose to live natural lives and they were put on reservations where they basically lived a Stone Age existence, but they got to have like real sex, real food, real whatever, no drugs, right? And but then there was the rest of civilization which carried on that was like drug fueled. They were all bred in test tubes and all this, right? And I don't want to see Catholics go to the reservation.
Yeah.
I think there's people who like are almost like, heck with it, I'm going to the reservation. But I want to see a way that like, if Catholics say observed a Sabbath from tech.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that would actually make them attractive to others. I think young people would literally join the church because of the witness.
Ash Wednesday and Lent are already weirdly attractive to non-Catholics, by the way.
A lot of non-Catholics come to Ash Wednesday.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And when I was in my 20s and not drinking beer at a bar because that was my Lenten thing, all the people would come out of the woodwork and want to talk about Lent. And I have just observed that, but.
Okay, so I'm excited about Pope Leo XIV. I want to say, I have a friend, when I asked him about the new Pope, this was right after Francis died, he says, I don't really care.
Yeah. This was a faithful Catholic.
This is a faithful Catholic. He goes, I'm not even sure they write their own encyclicals or just sign off on them. He goes, I'm just going to be good and Catholic either way, you know? Yeah. And I've seen this also with like pastor changes at churches or whatever. If you get too hyped up that the new guy is going to do everything you want, you end up not liking the new guy when he doesn't. And we need to be giving this guy a lot of like realistic leeway to be the Pope he needs to be, and not like we're like us sitting in judgment. I think this has been a big corruption in the church, is that we've trained our laity to sit in judgment of liturgy. I think it's ruined the Mass. We're all Siskel and Eberts of liturgy at this point. I think the same is true of popes. It's just not your job. It's not your job to judge them, and you're also not the Pope. You could have been the Pope if God wanted you to be the Pope. He apparently didn't.
Yeah.
Or at least not yet.
Yep. I forgot to say something earlier. And it's just a quick little point that I think that is interesting about technology. Our friend came over for dinner last night or the other night. He's a missionary priest out in the bush of Papua New Guinea. And the people out in the bush all have cell phones too. So this isn't just a first world.
I saw a chart about how people are excited or nervous about AI. Mm-hmm. And all the third world countries are really hopeful that AI is going to be awesome. Mm. And people in the first world countries are nervous.
That's interesting to think.
That was interesting. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you for listening to the Simpleton Podcast.
God bless Leo XIV.
If you know someone worthy of listening to this podcast, to join this small club of dedicated listeners, please share this podcast. Peace out, Laura. Talk to you later.